In the winter of 1959, 9 of the Soviet Union's most skilled young hikers set out on an expedition into the heart of the Ural Mountains. Led by Igor Dyatlov, this was a group of seasoned veterans, people who knew how to survive the most brutal conditions nature could throw at them. Their goal was Otorten Mountain, but they would never reach it. When the group failed to send a telegram by mid-February, a massive search operation was launched. What rescuers found on the slopes of Kholat Shakal, or Dead Mountain, would haunt them for the rest of their lives. High on a desolate slope, they found the group's tent. It was buried in snow, but strangely, it had been slashed open from the inside. All their gear, their warm clothes, and even their boots were still inside. It was as if something so terrifying had occurred that these expert hikers felt they had no choice but to slice through the canvas and run into a blizzard in their bare feet or just their socks. The temperature was minus 30 degrees Celsius. Why would anyone leave the only shelter they had to face certain death in the elements? This single question remains the dark heart of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The search team followed a trail of footprints leading away from the tent toward a nearby forest. Footprints that suggested a calm but desperate retreat. What did they see in the dark that night? As searchers pushed toward the edge of the woods, they found the first grim clues under an old cedar tree. 2 members of the group were found in only their underwear, lying near the remains of a small fire. Their hands were burned, as if they had desperately tried to keep the fire going, or even climbed the tree until their skin peeled away. But it was the discovery of the remaining 7 hikers over the following months that turned a survival tragedy into a macabre puzzle. Some had suffered massive internal injuries, including crushed chests and fractured skulls, yet there were no external bruises or soft tissue damage to explain the impact. It was as if they had been subjected to an immense, invisible pressure. Even more disturbing, one of the women, Lyudmila Dubinina, was found missing her tongue and her eyes. Another hiker had a skull fracture so severe it should have killed him instantly. Yet he had traveled hundreds of yards from the tent. The physical evidence didn't add up to a simple animal attack or a fall. The sheer variety of the trauma, combined with the lack of struggle and the odd placement of the bodies, suggested a series of events so chaotic and violent that no standard explanation seemed to fit. These weren't just victims of the cold. They were victims of a force that seemed to defy the laws of forensic science, as they were known in the 50s. When the Soviet authorities stepped in to investigate, the case took an even stranger turn. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov was initially thorough, but he quickly encountered anomalies that he couldn't explain. Despite the strange injuries and the odd behavior of the hikers, the official investigation was abruptly closed only a few months later. The final verdict provided by the state was both vague and chilling. It concluded that the 9 hikers had died due to an unknown compelling force which they were unable to overcome. This wasn't just a clinical summary. It was a cryptic admission of confusion from a government that usually prided itself on having answers for everything. Following this conclusion, the files were moved to a secret archive, and the area was restricted for years. In the paranoid climate of the USSR, this secrecy acted as fuel for a fire of speculation. Why would the state hide the details of a hiking accident? Was there a military cover-up? The families of the victims were left with no closure, and for decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident became a whispered legend, a story of something the Kremlin didn't want the world to understand. The compelling force became the central mystery, a phrase that suggested something almost supernatural, or perhaps highly classified. They closed the case, but the world was just starting to ask questions about what really happened on Dead Mountain. As the decades passed, the lack of a clear answer allowed a wide array of theories to flourish. One of the most persistent ideas involves secret military testing. In 1959, the Cold War was at its peak, and the Ural Mountains were often used for testing rockets and other experimental weapons. Witnesses from other hiking groups miles away reported seeing strange orange spheres floating in the sky on the very night the Dyatlov group died. Could they have been killed by a parachute mine or an accidental fuel explosion from a failed missile? This might explain why some of the hikers' clothes were found to be significantly radioactive, a detail that was long suppressed. Then there is the paranormal angle. One photo recovered from a hiker's camera appears to show a dark, blurry figure emerging from the woods, leading some to believe they were hunted by a yeti or an unknown mountain creature. Others suggest infrasound, a phenomenon where wind hitting the mountains creates a low-frequency sound that can trigger intense, irrational panic and physical illness in humans. potentially explaining the sudden flight from the tent. From UFOs to KGB operations gone wrong, the list of exotic explanations is endless. Each theory tries to bridge the gap between the radioactive evidence, the lights in the sky, and the brutal internal trauma of the victims. For many, the unknown force wasn't nature at all, but something far more intentional or alien that the Soviet government was desperate to keep under wraps. Could the truth be more terrifying than a simple accident? In search of a more grounded answer, many scientists have pointed toward the slab avalanche theory. For a long time, this was dismissed because the slope of Dead Mountain was considered too shallow for a typical avalanche. However, a major study in 2019 used sophisticated snow simulations to show how a unique combination of terrain and weather could have triggered a delayed slab avalanche. The theory suggests that the hikers had cut into the snow to pitch their tent, unknowingly weakening the support of a heavy slab of snow above them. Hours later, while they slept, this slab slid down and slammed into the tent. This would explain why they had to cut their way out and why several hikers suffered massive internal crushing injuries without external wounds. The pressure of the snow would have acted like a giant, soft hammer. While this explains the physical trauma and the initial flight, critics are quick to point out the inconsistencies. An avalanche doesn't explain the radioactivity, the missing tongue, or the orange lights in the sky. Nor does it explain why experienced hikers wouldn't have dug out their boots if the threat was just a localized slide. For the skeptics, science has provided a plausible cause for the injuries, but has failed to account for the atmosphere of high strangeness that surrounds the entire site. The avalanche remains the official scientific answer, but for many who have studied the scene, it feels like a forced fit for a much more bizarre puzzle. Interestingly, the most recent scientific breakthroughs in the case have an unexpected connection to Hollywood. Researchers Johann Gaum and Alexander Puzrin used computer code that was originally developed for the snow physics in the Disney movie Frozen to simulate the conditions on Kholat Syakhl. This high-tech reconstruction helped prove that a small, lethal slab of snow could indeed have fallen on the group. In 2020, Russian authorities officially concluded that an avalanche followed by poor visibility was the cause of death, hoping to finally put the mystery to rest. This modern demystification of the legend uses data to strip away the supernatural elements, framing the tragedy as a series of unfortunate natural events. By showing how the wind and the angle of the slope could create a deadly impact, science has attempted to close the door that the Soviet investigators left open decades ago. The simulation provides a bridge between the historical records and modern physics, offering a version of events that doesn't require secret weapons or aliens. However, even with the weight of official support and movie-grade technology, the resolution feels hollow to those who have studied the case for years. The simulation shows what could have happened, but it doesn't necessarily prove what did happen on that lonely mountain in the winter of '59. Even with advanced coding, some elements of the night remain untouched by logic, leaving the mystery alive for a new generation. Even today, more than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass incident refuses to fade into the history books. While the official stance now leans toward a tragic natural accident, many of the victims, families, and dedicated researchers reject the avalanche theory as a convenient way to bury a more complicated truth. The inconsistencies remain, and the aura of the mountain is as eerie as ever. Was it nature, or was it something we still can't name? No single theory perfectly aligns with every piece of evidence, and that is why this story continues to captivate millions. It sits at the perfect intersection of survival, conspiracy, and the unknown. Whether it was a secret Soviet test, a rare atmospheric phenomenon, or simply the brutal, uncaring force of the wilderness, the names of the 9 hikers are now synonymous with one of the world's greatest mysteries. We may never truly know what happened in the final hours of the Dyatlov group. As the snow continues to fall on Kholat Syakhl, the mountain keeps its secrets, leaving us to wonder if the truth is buried beneath the ice, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. Do you believe the case is finally solved, or is there more to the story? Let us know your theory in the comments.